Hello and welcome everybody to Defining and Sustaining a Values-Based Culture, the foundation of intentional culture. In this session today, we will be discovering the greatest detriment to employee engagement, learn how to intentionally develop a differentiating culture, and assess values and culture in the midst of a crisis. Presenting today is Steve Wiley. Steve is president of CEEK and author of Navigate Chaos, a #1 bestseller on Amazon. And he is on a personal mission to rid the world of zombies in the workplace. So let's please welcome Steve to the session. Steve, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm also going to turn off my video and audio and give the floor to you.
All right. Thank you, Mel. I am sharing my screen now. Hopefully everybody can see that. As Mel said, I am on a mission to rid the world of zombies in the workforce. Now at CEEK, we actually more formally say that we're helping organizations redefine and pursue wellness. And we define wellness as a healthy, engaged, inspired workforce serving a growing or otherwise successful organization. And we contend that's actually an intentional values-based culture that's the glue between those two things. And so today and throughout the course of the next 7 weeks, I'm actually going to share our methodology with you, share our approach. This is not rocket science, but you get this right, you can have a significant impact and you can leverage an intentional values-based culture to help us do what I'm out to do, which is to rid the world of zombies in the workforce. So before we dive into that, I really want to hear from you. So I want you guys to open up your chat and answer the following question. How would you describe a zombie in the workforce? So let's see what you guys have to say. I see everybody saying where they're from. Check the box, unengaged employees, uninspired, going through the motions. Someone who does the minimum, disconnected. Retired in place. I love it. These are all great answers, unfortunate answers. So keep them coming in. Feel free to keep them coming in. But if this is our definition, if these are the things that define what a zombie in the workforce looks like, I want to know, and Mel, can we go ahead and pull up our first poll question? I want to see if this works. My wife was logging in from another computer and it said our polls may be inactive. So Mel, are we able to pull up the first poll question?
That first poll is up and running, and so we've got people responding, about 12 people right now, and right now you've got a resounding yes.
Yep, it's one of those things, Mel, we can test everything out. I'm actually not seeing the results, but I appreciate you sharing those with me. So most of us have seen zombies in the workforce. Most of us have seen what we're describing in the chat right now, those who are disengaged, who are uninspired. Well, let's stop this poll, pull up the second poll question. I want to see how many of us are willing to admit, have you ever been a zombie in the workforce? How are we doing on this one, Mel?
We're still getting some responses in. We've got about a 70-30 split. About 70 are saying yes and 30 are saying no.
That's incredibly ironic. I'm not sure why I can't see these, but anyway, I'm gonna, you can go ahead and show the results at any time. It's ironic to me that that split is 70-30. Some of you may be familiar with Gallup's State of the American Workforce. They study the American workforce. They've done this for the last 2 decades. And every time they issue their report, they're finding that approximately 2/3 of the workforce is disengaged, nearly 70%. And these are people who are uninspired, unfulfilled. These are people going through the motions, the things that you guys have all alluded to. Now, at the same time, Gallup studies engagement, and they have drawn clear results to show that an engaged and inspired workforce is good business. They show, they quantify the numbers in terms of productivity, in terms of lower turnover, fewer defects, enhanced business results. And that's what this is all about. So I want to talk to you about, I want to go back to the agenda that Mel had shared earlier. And well, let me get my clicker working here. And this is what we're going to talk about. Mel had mentioned it earlier. We're going to talk about the greatest detriment to employee engagement. I call this the zombie fuel. We're going to learn what that is and how to prevent that. And how we prevent that is what we have second here. This is an intentional differentiating culture, being intentional about your culture, your values, your behaviors. I call this zombie prevention. And then last but not least, I'm not necessarily going to dive into this in the limited time that we have, but we're going to challenge you about how do you apply your values and your culture in the midst of challenges that exist today. They say, when their pressure is applied, that's when your true values come out. And how are you using those values intentionally as a filter for some tough times that we have to go through? Now, in this session and all remaining sessions, having some difficulty clicking here, we're going to follow something that we call the GEAR approach. So it starts with gather. That's what this is all about. This is a session where I lay out some context. I give you some information, some education, some material. And then we're going to provide you, and Mel already alluded to this, we're going to provide you access to our website, a landing page, exclusive access where you can go and get additional information. And as part of that additional information, we have this apply step where there will be some challenges here, but I'll also provide a simple activity worksheet, a workbook after each session that gives you further guidance on how you can do this on your own. And that being said, I'm here to help. So when it comes to receive, this is the last part of our GEAR approach. At the end, I'll share my contact information. If anybody has any questions, I welcome it. You can feel free to call me, email me, anything. Our goal is the mission I alluded to earlier. So if there's any way that we can help, that I can help, certainly welcome that opportunity. So that's the approach that we're going to apply. So coming back to this first item, discover the greatest detriment to engagement. I want to hear from you guys again. Let's go back to our chat and tell me, what is it in your mind that destroys engagement? Give you a minute to respond to that. Terrible leaders, poor culture and leadership, poor leadership, not knowing strengths, uninspiring leaders. A lot of this is coming back to leaders, not being appreciated for my work. No direction, unengaged team, lack of communication, lack of transparency, leaders who don't listen, no clear purpose. All of these punitive atmosphere, great answers. Some of these answers are very clear. Gallup in their reports, they talk about leadership and the impact. I'm going to move this chat screen off. They talk about leaders and their impact on organizations. Most of these, we contend, and we have a foundational belief at CEEK that a lot of these things, the root cause is ultimately something that we refer to as hypocrisy. We define hypocrisy as a state where your professed values of an organization differ from demonstrated behaviors. And most of the time, this is not intentional hypocrisy. This is not malicious hypocrisy. It's the fact that organizations may have a professed set of values, but never define the standards by which those values are assessed, never define what are the behaviors that reinforce those values. If I tell you, and I've worked with organizations on defining what their core values are, and if an organization says our core value is respect, it's great. What does that mean? What does that mean in terms of behaviors? Does respect mean that if the leader comes to me and says, Steve, you've got to go do X, Y, and Z, and I salute and that's respect, I just do it? Or does respect mean that we have a culture where you can challenge, where we're more open? Respect is actually listening and debating different ideas and challenging. which is right. Neither is right or wrong, but it's about being clear. What about employee engagement or employee management? If I say respect is a core value, does that mean in managing employees that we make the assumption that anytime there's difficulties or performance issues, we got to do a better job? We give employees every opportunity. We as managers own that. Or does respect mean that we are clear and direct and timely in providing the feedback that is needed or addressing performance issues? So a lot of times it just gets to the matter of, hey, we've got to be intentional and clear about the application of our values, which builds a language that the organization can use. And so a lot of times, perhaps you've heard the same from Peter Drucker, which is culture eats strategy for breakfast. Well, if that's the case, my question is, why do all organizations have strategic plans, but very few have culture plans? And so that's what this is all about. We're going to give you the foundation for how do you build an intentional culture. And in doing that, you can minimize that degree of hypocrisy in the organization. So right now, I want to share with you what that looks like. This is a summary view of how we go about building intentional culture. You can do this yourself. Just like any strategic plan has a mission and vision, I'm not going to dive into this in detail in this series, but you too should have a mission and vision, and perhaps your organization has a mission and vision. And I'm not going to go into great detail, but I will contend that whether you are leading a team of 5 or an organization of thousands, you should have a defined mission statement at a minimum. Don't just sit there and say, well, that's just the organization's problem. They need to address and tell us what our mission and vision is. So take the time to write clearly what it is that you do in your organization. Heck, as a person, you should have a very clear and defined mission statement. What is your purpose? So we're not going to dive into that. I'm happy to have a conversation with anybody who wants to talk about that, but that gives you your compelling purpose. Really, when it comes to the foundation of intentional culture, and many strategic plans have defined values for an organization, but that's the foundation of your intentional culture plan. It's about being clear about what are those values that differentiate our organization in service to our clients, our colleagues, and our community. And we're going to talk about that. That's the primary emphasis of today's session. In session 2, we're going to take it to the next level and talk about how do you minimize that degree of hypocrisy by being clear on the standards upon which those values are assessed. That gives you that language. And so what are the behaviors that reinforce those values and those that do not? And then the third part of our intentional culture plan is being intentional about what is the prescribed application of behaviors that occur on a very time-oriented, specific basis that you can say, yes, we did, or no, we did not. But they become ingrained in the fabric. And we'll talk a lot in sessions 2 and then 3 about the distinction between behaviors and rituals and how those rituals reinforce those values and become ingrained in the fabric of your culture. That in and of itself, don't have to complicate it anymore, will give you the foundation of an intentional values-based culture. And then the question becomes, how do you apply that? And I'll start with communication in session 4. We're going to talk about how do you communicate, not just to reinforce, but by defining your values and how they align to behaviors and rituals, you now have the framework for having difficult conversations. And quite honestly, I shouldn't even say that because these are no longer difficult conversations. People have the clear standards by which they're held accountable. Sometimes I've seen in organizations where people self-profess, you know what, I haven't lived up to this standard because the language is clear and the standard is much clearer as far as how to work in the organization. So we'll share some thoughts about communication. We'll also, in session 5, we're going to address both training the culture into the organization from the onset and ongoing basis, and how do you coach the leaders in implementing that culture. And as we saw from your responses, leadership is a big part of this. When that hypocrisy exists from the leader standpoint, that just engagement tanks. And last 2, we'll talk about how do you hire for the right fit. So how do you take this intentional culture and bring in the people that are a good fit for your culture? And finally, I'll say last but not least, how do you measure? And I say, you know, this shouldn't I don't want this to be conveyed as last, because we recommend measuring from the start, establishing a baseline. I see some of my friends from Sure People are on this call, and CEEK is, they have a phenomenal platform that we're going to talk about as one mechanism by which you can start to measure engagement in organizations and the impact of your intentional culture work and how that improves teamwork and collaboration, or whatever it is that you're looking to improve via your values and your culture. So let me dive in. So today, as I said, we want to talk about the foundation of intentional culture. And that really gets to that values piece. And so for you process-oriented people, I've got some simple steps here that you can follow. As we mentioned, we have a landing page that you can go to after this session where you can get more guidance on each of these steps. And quite honestly, some of this guidance will give you some tips and tools how you can leverage this time of disruption where you can facilitate the conversations that are needed, facilitate the engagement of your team if you want to do a collaborative exercise to brainstorm the values of your organization. Or maybe you already have the values of your organization, but based upon this conversation, maybe you just need to reassess those values. And I want to again allude to the fact that regardless of where you sit in the organization, don't say culture is owned by the top. Each and every team, you can have subcultures within organizations. And I would encourage as a subculture that you embrace and respect the values that may be defined by the parent organization, but you can take them to a different level. So collectively brainstorm the values of the organization. I'll give you a couple of ideas of how we do that. In the activity worksheet, you could send out a survey. We give you a list of common values in organizations, and you can ask people in your organization to select, so you start to narrow down the values. Another thing that we have done within organizations is 2 simple questions. Ask your team, what do we do well, and where do we need to improve? And you get open-ended responses to those questions, and I can go through and highlight every value statement, and that starts to give you a list of what we do well. And I'll talk about right to play and core and aspirational. It tells you what is true, what is core, and what we need to, where we need to do better. We'll give you some insights into those aspirational values. So you start to establish a list of what are the values that are really important to our team. You group and refine similar values. If people are saying collaboration, communication, knowledge sharing, maybe you lump those together under one value. But then you may have some subset of values that your team professes are important. You don't want to have 15 different values. You want to categorize those. You want to whittle those down. And if anyone's familiar with Patrick Lencioni, he wrote a book called 3 Big Questions for Frantic Families, and he makes this distinction between right to play, core, and aspirational values. So I suggest you categorize your values. Right to play are values that simply are, hey, everybody should do this. Every team in our organization should do this. Every organization in our industry should do this. And if you aren't, get out of the game. Some would say honesty and ethics are a right to play value. I wish that were actually the case. They certainly should be. They may be a right to play value. The core and aspirational values are those that are true today or those that we aspire to be that will differentiate you from other teams, differentiate you from other organizations, other companies, from competitors. Those are the things that set you apart in how you do what you do, not just what you do. And once you have whittled these down, you keep those right to play values, and they become a standard by which you filter decisions and expectations, but you really start to hone in on those 3 to 5 differentiating values. So you get the group to vote. More guidance is out there. You can follow this approach. And then you determine where to draw the line, and you draft a brief description of each of those values. So if you haven't done it, we've got some guidance for you, simple process. Over the coming weeks, we'll talk about the next steps for behaviors and rituals. But let me show you some examples of what this looks like in reality. So at CEEK, we practice what we preach. We define passion, integrity, and creativity as core values. We say it's the creative application of a passion sustained with integrity over an extended period of time that creates an epic narrative. And many might look at integrity and say, oh, That's a right to play value. Well, we'll tell you at CEEK, we'll say, if you're talking honesty and ethics, yeah. But we have a much deeper, broader definition of integrity about the wholeness. Integrity derived from the word integer. It's one, it's whole. Everything we do at CEEK is all about the wholeness and well-being of people. This is a differentiator for us. Let me share some other examples. A local gymnastics club. We worked with them to define their core set of values and create an intentional culture plan for them. They took the characteristics of exceptional gymnasts and said, how do we apply that to our business? And they wanted to differentiate themselves. And in this world where everybody wants to be in the gym 30, 40 hours a week and create the next Simone Biles, they talked about a different way where we have flexibility, we have balance, we recognize we're not just out there to create the next exceptional gymnast, but we want to create superior girls prepared to lead superior lives. And that factors into how they manage and balance and provide flexibility and options, but really get the big picture. And so this influences their culture and their organization. There's a federal agency we did some work for. Not going to go through this in great detail, just share for you some examples. This was a part of an office within a division, within another office, within an agency. And the office of about 25 people took the initiative. They embraced some core values from the parent organization, and they added another of their own called flexibility. There was no clear description of what those core values actually meant, so they created it. And the leader of this office shared what and I'll show you this in future weeks, we have something we call our credo cards, shared the credo card with her boss from the division, and the boss was blown away and now wants to adopt these value statements as their own and create their own credo card for their own organization. So this is powerful. And again, you can start at any level, implement this in your organization. Now, I challenge you, if you don't want to start in your own organization, start in your family. My wife and I, we did this about 8 years ago. Yes, our kids, we involved them a little bit in this initiative, but we leveraged our values as a filter for decisions we made about what we did and what we did not do. We defined some clear behaviors. What are the standards by which our values are demonstrated? You can see we've got some core values of heart, humility, humor. Those are things that differentiate our family. And we also had right to play values of respect and honesty. If you didn't demonstrate, those were the things that got you in trouble. The heart, humility, and humor, that's what really defines us and sets us apart. Try it. You don't want to try this in your organization? Try it with your family. Try it with yourself. Be clear. Set clear guidance with your kids about what are the behaviors that reinforce the values we embrace as a family. Now you have a language that you can use and everybody can understand. So I know I'm running short on time. I'm going to wrap this up. I want to leave you with some questions to consider. What are the values of your team, of my organization, and how would you categorize those values? Are those just right to play values, or are those core values, or something that is true today, or are those things that we want to be true, we wish were true? Do people even know what the core values in your organization are? Or do you just embrace something that someone else defined for you? Can you take initiative and define those within the team that you lead, within the family you lead? The question then becomes, okay, these are our values. Do they in fact differentiate our team? In what way? Does this set us apart? In the world of commoditized products and services, are these values something that actually differentiate us in how we deliver what we deliver? Because right now, you're not differentiating much in the products that you offer. It's more in the service, the how. The how really matters. And then, as I mentioned earlier, how are these values demonstrated? How do you apply these as a filter for the decisions that you are making in the midst of a challenge? When pressure is applied, times are tough. You got to be more intentional about your values. You got to be more intentional about how they apply in decisions that you're making. So next steps, just going to, again, I hope this was of value. I hope that you'll join us next week where we really get at the root of the hypocrisy and bringing clarity to those behaviors. I'll share lots of examples, business and personal. And so I hope you'll register for that if you haven't and joined us next week. We're going to keep these to half-hour sessions. As I mentioned, expand. Go out to our landing page. You can see it down here. We'll send you access via email to that. The application, consider those questions. Give some thought to that. Start a journal. Write your responses. Think about it. And if you don't have a clear set of values within your team or your organization, take that workbook that I give you on this landing page and apply it. And as I said, we love doing this work. I hope my passion for this work has come out as one of our core values. If you have any questions, just want to have a conversation, I'm open to that. If you want independent facilitation for this, great. We would love to do that for you. But what we're giving you, you can do on your own, but would love to support you if you want that help. So as a reminder, this is the website, CEEKLLC.com/webinars. Next week, we're going to talk about behaviors that reinforce and really address this notion, minimize that angle of hypocrisy that exists within organizations. Again, often unintentional, certainly not malicious. So that's all I have. Here's my contact information. Don't hesitate to reach out to me between sessions if you have any questions. I do show my book here. For those of you, 70% that said maybe at one point you were a zombie, if you are a zombie in the workforce or you feel like a zombie in life, now's a great time. Go purchase the book. I slashed the price of the book for the next 3 months because I think it's really a time that people could do some self-work. And I'm confident that this book would be very helpful to anyone who is just uninspired, unfulfilled, going through the motions in life. So let me turn it back over to Mel. I thank you all for participating and hope to see you all next week.